Howdy, Brian.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm really good. Thanks. How are you?
Doing well. The spring is upon us. So I'm got that rising energy with the
Huh?
spring. So that's
Yeah.
good.
What's the name for you've talked to me about practicing Tai Chi first thing in the morning when the sap is rising in the trees, and isn't there a word for that?
Well, we associate that with the element wood.
Uh-huh.
And wood, if we talked about five elements before as the sine wave. And so the sine wave is with yang, might be positive if you took above the line. Yin, hidden, would be negative below the line. And so our sine wave moves from yang to yin, from yin to yang, and back and forth in an oscillation like night and day and all that. So basically, the perfect balance point between yin and yang is Earth, and its reference is usually the horizontality of Earth, and so that balance between rising and falling, and so then you have fire, which is super yang, and water, which is super yin, and then you have these elements that are sometimes referred to as mixed elements, like in Tai Chi Chuan, and those would be metal and wood, and so with metal we have this condensation. And if you've ever seen moisture condense on a metal pipe, you could see how in a loose association you might say that that metal gave birth to that water, if you will, right? And so there becomes an association between metal and water, with the idea that there's a contraction that brings us to that yinnest of places. And then the opposite, once we're moving out of that, moving from the yinnest place through earth and then all the way to the youngest place, is that expansion that is represented by the growth in the spring. And in the I Ching, they'll sometimes refer to that as the arousing, gets associated sometimes with thunder. And it's the cracking open of the seeds and the expansion of nature in the spring. So that's the association there. And today we'll actually look at some stuff that talks about those dynamics going all the way back to Confucius. So a lot of it's attributed to Confucius. So that's kind of cool.
Cool. Yeah, nice segue. So today what we want to do is consult the oracle, and by that I mean the I Ching. And before this recording, you have done an I Ching reading. And so maybe you could talk about how you asked the question and what hexagrams you were given to read. And then we can maybe read them and talk about them.
Yeah, and what I was going to do was a bit of a preamble. I wanted to give you my quick preamble of how the I Ching works in my words, to give you an overview. And then we can look at some of the classics that are associated with the I Ching, some of which are almost for sure by Confucius or by his inner circle, some which come from the Confucian school, we know, and some we're almost sure were not by Confucius. And so, but they all shine lights on how the I Ching works, and they're called the 10 wings, and they're associated with different things. We'll read through them when we get to that. And then I did throw a hexagram for now. The idea when we spoke about it before the show a couple days ago was to try to throw the I Ching to get a general picture of the times. And in the spirit of complete disclosure and transparency, I think that I completely failed at that in that regard. The reason that I think I failed is kind of interesting. It's like because I started to ponder. I mean, I think that the I Ching worked for what I wanted, but I don't think I mean, and I say it worked the way that I expect it to work, but I don't think we got what we wanted, which was a generic snapshot of the times. And I think as I've pondered this, I think the reason why is because I think that what the I Ching gives us is this interplay of the pre-birth, that is the generative forces, as they're actually coming through, as we've spoken before, from the past, as they're actually forming the probabilistic universe into the existent universe. So I think the I Ching might only deal in particulars and not in generalities because it was built for that. It was built to go to and to say, what about this? Or what about that? Or what about. And so the question, what about everything? It might give us the answer 42, right? or, but it didn't give me the answer 42. I think what it gave me was a reading about this enterprise of the podcast and the general situation that we're in. But we should get there through the building up. Okay. So the I Ching starts with yin and yang, like everything does, which is why it's the grand ultimate. We can't go back any farther than yin and yang, than the basic duality. And so the way that that gets translated into the I Ching is through lines. So, like here, for example, I'm just going to show you a couple of these. So here you see this hexa, which means six, right? Gram writing. So it's a six writing. So in this case, it's six lines. For those of you that are just listening, I'm holding up a little card that has six lines on it. Now you'll notice there's two different kinds of lines. There's solid lines and there's lines that have a break in the center. And those lines represent the light and the dark, where ironically, the solid line is the light and the broken line is the dark. That is, the solid line is yang and the broken line is yin. So the sages took upon themselves this system of building, and the story is actually that back in the 1150s, something like that, you had, and I don't know whether it's BC or DC, it must be BC, right? So you had King Wen, and King Wen, who's like a mythical type character, he's having it out with the evil Cho Shin, and he's thrown in jail by him. And while he's in jail, he cooks up the I Ching. But he does it out of pieces that predate the I Ching. And the things that predate the I Ching are the Gua, and they're associated with a mythical Chinese sage called Fu Shi. And Fu Shi, there's two arrangements. One's pre-birth, one's post-birth. One supposedly came from the markings on a turtle's shell, and one supposedly that came out of one of the rivers, and the other one came from the markings on the side of a horse that also came out of the river. Different river it might have been. One might have been the Yellow, one might have been the Po, as I recall. But so these arrangements are arrangements of the Gua. And what the Gua are arrangements of three of those lines. So we translate those as trigrams, or three writings, writings of three lines. And so if we do that, what we've really got is 2 times 2 times 2, that idea, right? And so we've got 8. 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. So there's 8 possibilities of broken and solid within those three lines. right? I can have all solid, I can have all broken, I can have one solid in any position, I can have one broken in any position, and that covers the 8. So those 8 called the Bagua are the same Bagua that we talk about in the martial arts system, Bagua Zhang, 8 trigram palm. Those are the Gua. And those Gua represent polarities. So for example, one of the great polarities are heaven and earth and fire and water. And those are, sort of a representative of similar energies. And then you have wood and thunder and lake and mountain. And those are where we start to get the idea of these things manifesting in the physical world as energies in the physical world, but still like primal manifestations, like mountain, right? Timeless idea. And then we have this idea that was King Wen's piece that he brought in, which was taking pairs of those trigrams. And now it's 8. We had 8, right? 2, 4, 8 times 2, 4, 8. 8 times 8, we have 64 possibilities now. People who are fluent in the coding world, that is the world of computers, who know about bits, they will recognize the binary system here. If a switch can be either on or off, we have either yin or yang. And so everything we can do everything with just yin or yang, turns out, in the computer world. So this is a similar idea, breaking things down. But when we combine them, we start to get different ideas. Like, remember we talked about 3 in harmony. So the bottom 2 lines get associated with earth, the middle 2 lines get associated with man, and the top 2 lines get associated with heaven. There's also this idea that these lines aren't static, right? Because this whole book is about E, which is change. So what's happening here really is we've got a snapshot, a cross section in time of a fluid, moving, dynamic situation. So what's really happening here is a few different ways change is moving through this. An important one is that these lines are moving through the hexagram. So the first line is the bottom line. And then as we go up, second place, third place, fourth place, fifth place, sixth place, the sixth line is just about to pass out of the hexagram. So there's this idea of movement. And so the bottom hexagram gets called the inner hexagram, or the inner trigram rather. And the inner trigram tends to speak to what's on the inside. And then the top trigram is considered the outer trigram. So it has to do with what's on the outside. So then we also have this idea within a hexagram that there is a governor and a subordinate governor. Within the household, the traditional household, this would be the man and the wife. So the center of each trigram represents those controlling positions. So the position of the husband would be up here at number 5. The central position of the outer world. The position of the wife would be number 2, the central position of the inner world. So we have this idea then that in a perfectly balanced situation, there would be appropriate relationships between all of these positions, all these lines. And if everything was in its perfect, appropriate position, we would have this hexagram here at the bottom, this new one that I'm showing. And what I'm showing here is now one where the very first line is solid, then we have a broken, then we have a solid, then we have a broken, then we have a solid, then we have a broken. So what we see is that Position of the husband is yang, the position of the wife is yin, and we have this alternation between strong and weak that moves through the or between assertive and yielding, not necessarily weak. So the idea is that any particular situation, it might be where everything is in its perfect position and in its perfect relationship to everything else. And then that would be this position, which is called after completion. But the odds are very good that you're not after completion. I don't think I've ever gotten after completion. The odds are you're somewhere before completion. And it turns out that curiously, this is 63 of the 64. And number 64 is called before completion. And everything is shifted down one. So it's as if it's the moment before everything moved up into its appropriate place. So this is the basic strategy then that breaks down possible situations into 64 archetypes by breaking down the patterns of relationship of the forces within the situation, with the idea of the scale as a kind of a slider, but apparently won't slide all the way out to the general. At least I didn't get the feeling that it did in our case. And so a black dog, I'm sure, is associated with one of the trigrams.
Yana Ashku.
Yana Ashku, exactly. So a lot of people are familiar with the I Ching and they're familiar with this idea that you have the different hexagrams and then each hexagram gets a different name that's kind of talks about what that situation is like. And they have great names, you know, they kind of are like the fingerprint of what a circumstance might look like. I'll just grab some here and see if I can find uh, the creative, the receptive, difficulty at the beginning, youthful folly, waiting, conflict, holding together the army, the taming power of the small, treading, peace, standstill, enthusiasm, contemplation, splitting apart, innocence, taming power of the great, the corners of the mouth, the preponderance of the great, influence, progress, obstruction, pushing upward, the cauldron, the well, the marrying maiden, the gentle, the joyous, limitation, inner truth. You get the idea. These are different gestalts, we might say, different situations that are subject, they're formed by different circumstances, okay, by different forces. So now there's this idea within this. I guess let's go to what Confucius says because he kind of explains how this is thought to work in some of these things. So everybody knows about this part that has the 64 chapters, and each of the chapters has its own name, and it talks about a situation. And there's two pieces to each of those chapters. One is called the judgment or the decision, and one is called the image. And one of those was put together by King Wen of Chao. And the other one was put in later by the Duke of Chao, who was a relative later of his, which I believe he's the one that's attributed with breaking down the individual lines and what they mean. Now, the breaking down of the individual lines means there's an interesting thing. You might think that if we're building these hexagrams, we would just need a yin and a yang, because that's all we ever see is yin or yang. But within the Taoist conception or the Confucian conception, there isn't just yin and yang. There's old yin and young yin, and old yang and young yang. What's the difference between the old and the new? Well, the old, being old, has now begun to change into its opposite. Old winter, if winter gets old enough, it's spring, right? If fall gets old enough, it's winter. So we have yin, we have yang, we have yin about to change into yang, and yang about to change into yin. And that change is going to morph the situation from the beginning situation, represented by the first hexagram, to the second situation, which is the where you're headed, what the outcome is predicted to be. And so the way it does that is through moving lines, those lines that change. The regular lines don't change. Only those moving lines, and usually the moving lines have to do with the subject that you're specifically talking about. That's sort of what personalizes it. So you might have 6 moving lines, you might have no moving lines. No moving lines means pretty much this is the situation and it doesn't speak much about changing it. The moving line though sort of tells you the role the change is likely to play and maybe the player that you're inquiring about, the role that they might serve within that. So what I was getting to before was we all have that idea of the I Ching is those chapters, or people that are familiar with it. That's a popular understanding. We have those 64. But there's another part to the I Ching. And the other parts of the I Ching is referred to as the 10 wings. And the 10 wings are they're all attributed to Confucius. Some we're pretty sure are from Confucius, and some we're pretty sure are not from Confucius. But he explains to us how the I Ching was made and some of how it works. And so I thought it would be good to read parts of this just to kind of give a background. Now, what I'm reading from is the I Ching by that was translated by Richard Wilhelm, which I made reference to before. It has a foreword by Carl Jung, and it's published by Bollingen in, I believe, in Germany. So there's one of the wings here is called the Shuoqua, and which is a discussion of the trigrams, which I had mentioned. We spoke about the trigrams being those 3-line sections that predate the creation of the I Ching itself. I think this is the 8th wing. In ancient times, the holy sages made the book of changes thus. They invented the Yarrow stock oracle in order to lend aid in a mysterious way to the light of the gods. To heaven they assigned the number 3 and to earth the number 2. From these they computed the other numbers. They contemplated the changes in the dark and the light and established the hexagrams in accordance with them. They brought about movements in the firm and the yielding and thus produced the individual lines. They put themselves in accord with Tao and its power. And in conformity with this, laid down the order of what is right. By thinking through the order of the outer world to the end, and by exploring the law of their nature to the deepest core, they arrived at an understanding of fate. Whew. Is that like
Must be nice.
must be nice, I tell you. So it mentioned that about the Yarrow stalks, and the Yarrow stalks were, there's this idea that there's humans and there are animals and there are plants, and they are all in various relationships with the creative energies. So there was an idea, for example, in the old world of being able to predict the future by reading the entrails of animals or by reading the movements of birds. And there's some interesting stories about that. So it might not be completely crazy. Um, the idea with the yarrow stalks is that these plants are in tune somehow. They're vibrationally wired into the big changes of things. And so there's a process where one starts out with 50 yarrow stalks, and one yarrow stalk comes off of the bunch and it goes behind your back. And as I recall, that's the yarrow stalk that gets tuned in, and it tunes in all of the other yarrow stalks to perform right. So now you got 49 Yarrow stalks. And you go through a process of dividing these, which is in the book. It explains how to do it. It's very complicated. And you go through quite a few divisions before you generate the line. And what you'll generate is the number 6, 7, 8, or 9. 7 and 8 are the two that never change. 6 and 9 are the two that change. One from yin to yang, one from yang to yin. And so you go through that process, which later, which is also in the same book explained, was the coin oracle. And the coin oracle is done to generate the same set of numbers, 6, 7, 8, or 9, but by throwing coins. So a head is yang and it's worth 3, and a tail is yin, so it's worth 2. And so you go through, you add up the 3 coins, you throw a coin for each line. It's quicker. Well, the idea, and Carl Jung wrote about this, and he wrote about it in the introduction of this book. This idea, which he spoke about at length, of synchronicity. And the idea is that chance is also wired into, and this is where we get into this, the probabilistic universe meeting the deterministic universe, because now that coin fell that way in this situation. So there's an idea that we can read off of that more about this situation somehow through this mysterious medium. And so you generate these lines, and then the combination of two trigrams gives you a hexagram that is the situation.
So
Therefore, it's yeah, go ahead.
so yeah, curious to hear what the hexagram was for the podcast and for this general state of things, and maybe we can still have a little time to interpret the reading.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we'll have to, this may apply on a larger way, and maybe it's just because I'm looking from my seat, the way that I see it. But so the hexagram that we got was this one here at the top, which is maybe showing up backwards, but it says number 53, which is called development, but it's also called gradual progress. In the image, the trigram on top is the trigram for wood. The trigram on the bottom is the trigram of mountain. So there you can look at that and you can say, well, I got the image. We're talking about a tree growing on a mountain. And in previous episodes, we've talked about metaphorical machines, you might say, philosophical machines working through the power of metaphor. Well, here we have a tree on the top of a mountain. What do we know about a tree on the top of a mountain?
It doesn't have it easy.
It doesn't have it easy. And if it's still alive and it grew, we know it grew slow.
When I've gotten that hexagram before, I've thought of this one tree that's at the top of Tent Rocks, or Kachikatue, I think is the Native American name for that national monument. And there's this one juniper tree that's got to be like 300 years old. And there's a legend about somebody having grabbed onto that tree as they were jumping off, some forlorn lovers, ancient Native American tribe. And this tree is like 4 feet tall or something, and it's gnarled, and it's like a bonsai.
400 years old or
Yeah, yeah.
800
And
years old.
and from that point you can see to Colorado in one direction and past Albuquerque to Mount Taylor in the other direction, and the Jemez and the Ortiz, and like you can see everything from up there.
Which is another aspect of this hexagram, but working the other way. And that is that the tree on the mountain can be seen from a great distance. And so this comes to take associations with influence. So here's how the I Ching breaks it down. First, the commentary by the modern Chinese person that helped Wilhelm do this Hexagrams made up of sun, which is wood, which wood is associated, they call it the gently penetrating. And what they're talking about here, I think, is the way that roots work through the earth. They penetrate, but they gently penetrate. They work their way through slowly and gradually. So there's this idea of wood being gentle. So it gets called the gentle. Mountain is called keeping still. And so mountain gets associated with stillness. And so it gets associated with tranquility. So what this hexagram shows, if you remember the within and the without, is it shows gentleness without, and on the inside is tranquility. It also implies the patience that goes along with that gradual development. So here's what he says: a tree on a mountain develops slowly according to the law of its being and consequently stands firmly rooted. This gives the idea of a development that proceeds gradually, step by step. The attributes of the trigram also point to this. Within is tranquility, which guards against precipitate actions, and without is penetration, which makes development and progress possible. Interesting hidden teachings just inside the observations there. So the official judgment, the official decision that would have been written by King Wen says development. The maiden is given in marriage. Good fortune, perseverance furthers. Keep going. Looks good. You're on the right course. Now, what does this have to do with a maiden? Well, in the ancient Chinese culture, you didn't just like go to Vegas on the weekend and decide you're going to get married. That wasn't a thing in, China. In China, in fact, there were 6 rituals that had to be gone through that would finally result in the marriage. So it's used here in its sense of this is a process that has to be gone through, that you just got to go through and be patient and don't take precipitate actions, work through it, gradual. And so here he explains that the development of events that lead to a girl's following a man to his home proceeds slowly. The various formalities must be disposed of before the marriage takes place. This principle of gradual development can be applied to other situations as well. It's always applicable where it is a matter of correct relationships of cooperation, which just relates to some of our other conversations that we've had about gradual progress and having to go through the fusion of those horizons idea. As for instance, in the appointment of an official, the development has to be allowed to take its proper course. Hasty action would not be wise. This is also true, finally, of any effort to exert influence on others. For here, too, the essential factor is a correct way of development through cultivation of one's own personality. No influence, such as that exerted by agitators, has lasting effect. Within personality, too, development must follow the same course if lasting results are to be achieved. Gentleness that is adaptable, but at the same time penetrating, is the outer form that should proceed from inner calm. Great. Perfect. So then we get to the image. On the mountain, a tree, the image of development. Thus, the superior man abides in dignity and virtue in order to improve the mores, which is to say, the customs of the people. He can be seen from a long distance, so he has to be rooted in virtue, rooted in dignity, and in Confucian correctness is the message here. The tree on the mountain is visible from afar, and its development influences the landscape of the entire region. It does not shoot up like a swamp plant. Which I think, what an apropos allusion. Even knowing back in the day when he wrote this, swamp creature didn't have exactly the implications that it has for us today. But the I Ching is like that. How does it do it? Its growth proceeds gradually. Thus, the work of influencing people can only be gradual. No sudden influencing or awakening is of lasting effect. Progress must be quite gradual. In order to obtain such progress in public opinion and in the mores of the people, it is necessary for the personality to acquire influence and weight. This comes about through careful and constant work on one's own moral development. And it's going to get more specific in this situation because we had a changing line. So in this case, 53 here was the original hexagram before the moving line changed. And in our case, the line that changed was this one here, number 5, one down from the top, which is the ruler or the governor of the hexagram as a whole. And so what it says about that, 9 in the 5th place, the wild goose gradually draws near the summit, but for 3 years the woman has no child. But in the end, nothing can hinder her. Good fortune. So, what it says there, the summit is a high place. In a high position, one easily becomes isolated. One is misjudged by the very person on whom one is dependent, the woman by her husband, the official by his superior. This is the work of deceitful persons who have wormed their way in. The result is that relationships remain sterile and nothing's accomplished. But in the course of further development, such misunderstandings are cleared away and reconciliation is achieved after all. So it sounds like it's basically saying that there's a period of confusion before communication happens. And deceitful persons have wormed their way in. I could read that having to do with the general situation of the internet. But that in the course of further development, misunderstandings are cleared away, reconciliation is achieved after all, good fortune. And what it turns into by changing that line, okay, if we look at it again, so the second line in the original hexagram is solid and it's going to change to a broken. And what you might notice is then we have broken, broken, solid, broken, broken, solid.
So mountain on top of mountain?
Mountain on top of mountain, which is the I Ching's way of saying really mountain,
Very mountain.
very mountain, like super mountain, doubled. And in Chinese culture, there's this idea that when you double something like double happiness, you don't just have the character for happiness, you have two characters for happiness. Doubled up. There used to be a chewing gum that had that, used that idea, right? Double mint. You remember that? Double everything. It's twice as good if you double it. Just double it. So what we get is mountain doubled. The image of this hexagram is the mountain, the youngest son of heaven and earth. Uh, the male principle is on top. It strives upward by nature. The female principle is below, since the direction of its movement is downward. Thus, there is rest because the movement has come to its normal end. In its application to man, the hexagram turns upon the problem of achieving a quiet heart. It's very difficult to bring quiet to the heart. While Buddhism strives for rest through an ebbing away of all movement in nirvana, the Book of Changes holds that rest is merely a state of polarity that always posits movement as its complement. Possibly the words of the text embody directions for the practice of yoga. And the judgment here is keeping still, keeping his back still so that he no longer feels his body. He goes into the courtyard and does not see his people. No blame. True quiet means keeping still when the time has come to keep still and going forward when the time has come to go forward. In this way, rest and movement are in agreement with the demands of the time, and thus there is light in life. We talked last episode about this idea of one of the qualities of the sage is knowing the time. And here they're referencing that directly. He knows when to go out, he knows when to stay in. He knows when to be active in the outer world. He knows when to come out. Similarly, they say that the Taoist sages are usually in retreat in the mountains. But if things become too disordered down in the valley, they'll come down, rebalance things, and then retreat back to the mountains when the work is done there. So there is this idea of there's an appropriate time to go out, there's an appropriate time to stay in retreat. The hexagram signifies the end and the beginning of all movement. The back is named because that's where all the nerve fibers that mediate movement are. If the movement of these spinal nerves is brought to a standstill, the ego, with its restlessness, disappears, as it were. When a man has thus become calm, he may turn to the outside world because he no longer sees in it the struggle and tumult of individual beings. And therefore, he has that true peace of mind which is needed for understanding the great laws of the universe and for acting in harmony with them. Whoever acts from these deep levels makes no mistake. So the image, the mountains standing close together, the image of keeping still, thus the superior man does not permit his thoughts to go beyond his situation. Heart thinks constantly, this cannot be changed, but the movements of the heart, that is a man's thoughts, should restrict themselves to the immediate situation. All thinking that goes beyond this only makes the heart sore.
Reminds me of the conversation we were having about ambition a couple of episodes ago, and what you just said about a man not acting beyond his uh,
Situation.
situation.
Yeah.
That 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 overreaching, trying to do too much too fast, undermines that groundedness that we're going for.
Yeah, and it moves our experience away from here and now, this situation, off into some future, and then, oh, and then, um, yeah, there's there some funny references to that, but no, I think that Island, the book Island
Huxley.
by Huxley, one of the little devices that he had around the island, rhetorical device nonetheless. But within his island, his literary island, there were mynah birds, and they would be in the bushes and the shrubs, and they were trained to say, "Here and now, boys. Here and now. Here and now, boys." And that's where ambition can lead us astray. And we talked last week about fragmentation and distraction, and it reminds me that you've probably heard me refer to there being three kinds of shit that we don't want to waste time on: chicken shit, bullshit, and elephant shit. Right? And if you think, you probably know people that are lost in all three of these, right? Chicken shit, it's not even worth talking about, right? Bullshit, it's not true. No use talking about it. And elephant shit are these like fanciful dreams of ambition that I had a friend back in the day, and every time you met him, it was always like, "Yeah, and I'm gonna." There were always these plans, and they were always grandiose, and nothing ever happened. Well, that was all elephant shit. It was all just kind of like puffed up, but it was all like lost in the future and very little here and now. Like I don't know how many mynah birds it would take to cure that. But that's really what we're talking about, and that's what we were talking about last episode too, with this idea of fragmentation and things stealing your attention and your focus, and that sort of thing. So yeah, here and now, boys, here and now, or as Shunryu Suzuki, the Zen master, used to say, "Don't goof off." Just that's pretty straight up. Don't goof off.
Do
Uh,
you have any connections that you want to make from the reading and the interpretation to more specifically to our situation?
well, I think that our situation. I guess I had to think about it because I was trying to parse it in a universal way, and I don't know. I don't. It just didn't seem to fit in my head that way. Whereas it did seem to fit in my head around the Fools and Sages podcast pretty clearly. and that is, as we both knew, it's gonna take s a consistent effort of gradual progress to get anywhere, and I think we kinda knew that, and, that we actually have to build a reputation through. I think that what it was saying was, you gotta do your due diligence. You know, you gotta go through the growing pains, you gotta go through the learning curve, you gotta do your homework, you gotta do your best, you know? I mean, and it's like whenever people say, "Do you have any advice for me?" That's always what my advice is, do your best, right? What else can you say, really? Uh, I suppose you can say,
And
"If you see me running, try and keep up."
all of those judgments or I'm sorry, interpretations relate to me more to the first hexagram. Do you have anything to say about the changing line and the second hexagram?
Well, I think that the significance of it is that if you are going to get to a place where one can exert some amount of influence, what is the appropriate relationship to have with that influence? And I think that it has to do with, I mean, it said it pretty clear that it has to be connected to your personal development. That is, it has to come out of your higher impulses, not your lower impulses, as we spoke about last week. And and it means that maybe there's a heightened responsibility. You know, within the Zen tradition, whenever the master gives a teisho, he sits in what they call the high seat. And so a lot of the lectures are saying when Rinzai was in the high seat, he said, you know, and saying this is his, he's not just speaking for himself, but he's speaking for the enterprise, the project, the great work that we're sharing together, that idea. And I think that while we're not quite as perhaps as focused as Zen monks in the specific pursuit of this or that, we do have a commitment to sincerity and to yielding. As I said last week, I think I know you thought that last week was a really good episode, the one that just dropped, and I re-listened to it to do the notes, and I think it was. I did think there was good stuff, a lot of good stuff in there, and we spoke about personal power and things like that, and that we talked about the idea of doing justice to your experience. Doing justice to your experience means bringing all of your growth into it, bringing who the most updated version of who you are into that, to manifest that. As an artist, that's pretty clear. I wanna bring my clearest efforts to, did I disappear again?
No, no.
Oh, okay.
What you're saying is kind of crystallizing some things that have been happening for me in the last couple of weeks that I hadn't really formally put together. So so one is maybe it was in that episode, and then it was reinforced in the conversation we had with Paul Fenn, where he was talking about the work that he was doing being much more important to him than the ability to generate money from it, and kind of like the commercialization of the work comes and goes, and he figures out how to make ends meet, but the work is a continuous thread, and it's not just about community choice aggregation, it's about this confluence he's come up with, sort of an alchemy of personal responsibility and local community and rejection of what he sort of called the charade or the scam that we've created through our own projection and abdication of responsibility and abdication of democracy, and like there's kind of like a rich thing that he had there that resulted in, well, I'm just going to do this work whether it pays or not, and somehow it pays enough. And
To
I
provide the possibility for this improved mores of the people,
Well,
right?
and that's
This idea that we're impacting the body politic somehow that helps us facilitate and lubricate our collective social enterprise in a way that generates more good. Like that's the definition of wisdom, the ability to discern and apply universal principles and values. I'm reading it that foster personal growth, well-being, and the greater good. Which is basically the mores of the people,
yeah.
right? This
Yeah.
idea is can we impact that, right?
Yeah, I just posted something on LinkedIn today about doing free coaching sessions because yeah, I'm kind of in a stage of drumming up business, and I've been doing a lot of networking, and it's been really rewarding, but it hasn't resulted in a whole lot of paying work right away. But I figure I love coaching. I'll just do it anyway, and I've gotten some really interesting responses, and I have some pro bono sessions lined up, and so that's what it was bringing up for me is kind of
Mhm.
like just do the work, and hopefully the rest figures itself out.
Well, that sounds like a symptom of shifting from the will to receive to the will to bestow. The work takes on a meaning because it's something that you want to midwife into the world. That's the way that Socrates used to speak about it. Literally as a midwife giving birth to a new thing that wants to manifest. And the idea was to try to it's ironic that he was executed for corrupting the morals of the youth when from his seat what he was trying to do is exactly what Confucius was talking about there, improving the mores of the people by
I've never
uh,
thought of
his
the
philosophy.
irony of that so symbolically as just now. I always kind of thought, well, yeah, that's too bad, but really, um, there's there's uh, there's something in that about you kind of having to do what's right, even if the world's not ready for it yet, and that
Mhm.
can be kind of a dangerous limb to climb out on.
No pioneers have it easy.
Yeah,
That's just what it is.
but
No good deed
perseverance
goes
furthers.
unpunished, but perseverance furthers. Somebody's got to cross the gray water. Your gray water ain't going to cross itself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, should we leave it
Yeah.
there?
So we'll see. It says this baby takes 3 years.
I have 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Far as I know, knock on wood. and and yeah, thanks to everybody for sticking with us this long. Tell all your friends and help us influence the mores of the people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really excited. April's going to be a very exciting month for us, I think, as far as guests coming and conversations that we're going to have. I'm very excited for it. So don't miss that, folks. We don't do empty advertisements here on Fools and Sages. It's authentic or it doesn't fly at all. So if I'm saying it, it's true. I'm definitely jazzed to talk to some of these folks.
I'm excited too, and yeah, thanks to everybody for hanging with us this long, and let's keep it going, see where it goes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Brian.
Thank you, sir. We'll see y'all next time.